Byzantine history spans for about a millennium, from 330 AD to 1453. Just a century less than the classical Roman Empire, by the way. If we want to get into the details of what was Byzantium and what it did, we first require a general knowledge of what happened between those two fateful dates. And now I won't waste your time any longer. Let's get our hands into some history. As I've said in my previous video, Byzantine history begins with the foundation of Constantinople, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. In these years, Nicene Christianity was actively promoted by all emperors, with the brief exception of Julian the Apostate, and reached an important point with the Edict of Thessalonica of 380, which established it as Rome's official religion. Border disputes and wars with the Sassanids were common, as were usurpers, rebellions, and civil wars. Well, just regular Byzantine affairs, by the way. The barbarian migrations were starting to get into full motion, and the Romans fought various conflicts with the Visigoths, who had crossed the Danube into Thrace and Moesia. This even resulted in the death of an emperor, Valens, at the Battle of Adrianople of 378. All of these issues were fixed, or at least mitigated, by Theodosius, who was later known as the Great. He crushed any opposition, supported Christianity, and reunited the empire for the last time. Theodosius split the empire between his sons, between East and West. Many figures, especially of barbarian descent and relatives of the emperors, had a strong influence in the imperial courts at this time. War with the Sassanids ensued, but threats lied to the north and the west. The first Hunnic incursion struck, together with other foreign groups, and were driven back with tributes. The ceasing of these payments provoked the Huns into attacking the Romans, but they were beaten in Gaul. After a brief sack of northern Italy, the Huns became a minor nuisance. While all of this was happening, the Codex Theodosianus, a law code, was written, and strong theological debates climaxed into the Council of Chalcedon of 451, creating the Miaphysite split. At one point, an emperor was deposed by his allies' faction's leader, who was quickly deposed by a general, who was then replaced again by that leader. This emperor swiftly dealt with the barbarian threats, especially the Ostrogoths, by directing them towards the west, while, as far as religious matters went, he was close to the Miaphysite cause. His successor, chosen by his wife, was also of this theological position, and caused the first schism with the Pope. A usurper was rapidly crushed, but a new war with the Sassanids and the invasion of Bulgars and Slavs in the Balkans drained the empire. The new emperor became more distant from the heretical causes and focused on establishing client states, avoiding conflicts, except for one that sprung up against the Persians obviously, probably due to his nephew's initiative. This nephew was Justinian, who, when he ascended to the throne, established an eternal peace with the Sassanids by paying a large sum of gold, which would prove futile, as a few years later, war would have struck again, which ended with the establishment of another tribute to the Eastern power. He was the man behind the Corpus Juris Civilis, the basis of our modern European law code, the construction of the Hagia Sophia, and the reconquest of Italy, North Africa, and southern Spain, aka the Renovatio Imperi. His authoritarian tendencies appear both in civil and religious contexts, provoking a massive popular revolt in Constantinople and, in other occasions, contrasts with the bishops of Rome and other clergymen. His successors would try to hold his conquests together, but had to face numerous threats in the forms of Persians, again in the east, Avars and Slavs in the Balkans, Longobards in Italy, Visigoths in Spain, and Berbers in Africa. While there were some territorial losses, Justinian's legacy lived on. After a few years under a usurper, a new more popular emperor arose, Heraclius. Right away, he had to face a war with the Persians, which had already begun 8 years earlier. While initially the Sassanids had managed to achieve such victories as to reach Chalcedon and the Bosphorus, Heraclius' strategies and alliances worked in his favor, resulting in territorial gain and a decisive victory against the historical enemies of the Romans. This gigantic victory was soon spoiled though by the Arabian invasion, which gained control over the Levant and Egypt in just a few years. Looking beyond the ephemeral gains and the subsequent enormous losses, Heraclius was fundamental for establishing the new identity of the empire. His successors would attempt to hold back the Arab advance, all the while dealing with further pressure from the various peoples in the Balkans, which would soon penetrate through Epirus and Greece, and with the Visigoths and Longobards to the west. Due to this dangerous situation, especially for Anatolia due to the Caliphate's pressure, it is assumed that in these years the theme system was born. By the death of the last Heraclean emperor, North Africa, the Levant, large sections of Italy, and a piece of eastern Anatolia were lost. The years that followed, between the end of the 7th and the beginning of the 8th centuries, witnessed the rapid succession of numerous emperors and are now known as the 20 Years' Anarchy. It was salt added to injury for Byzantine instability and weakness. Order was restored with the ascension of Leo III, an Isaurian commander. He repelled the Arabs' attempt at a second siege of Constantinople, also thanks to his Bulgarian allies. But this emperor is also important for his involvement in religious matters. He prohibited the worship of images, thus kickstarting the iconoclast period. Because of this, he had to face various popular revolts, opposition from the clergy, and the detachment of the Exarchate of Ravenna, thus losing influence and power in Italy. Ravenna would fall just a few years later to the Longobards, practically ending Byzantine rule in the northern part of the peninsula. His successors had to deal with increasing threats from the Bulgars, but also managed to reconquer some of the lands of eastern Anatolia and Syria from the now unstable Caliphate. The last of the Isaurians, Constantine VI, was too young to rule, and his mother, Irene, who had lost her husband, became regent, but later decided to assume full power. During her regency, she called the Second Council of Nicaea, restoring the worship of icons. In the end, she was overthrown in a palace coup. What followed the fall of the Isaurians was the succession of various emperors who ruled for little time. They faced further Bulgarian threats, the start of the Arab invasion of Sicily, and some tried to impose a new wave of iconoclasm, which was ended though with Michael III. This ruler played a central role in creating the basis for Byzantine resurgence, recovering lands lost from the Bulgarians and defeating the Abbasid forces in various occasions. Despite these successes, Michael was dethroned in 867 by Basil I, known as the Macedonian. He was responsible for creating the Basilica, an important collection of laws, and during his reign there was a de facto breach with Rome, which was strengthened by the fact that the Western City and Constantinople were competing to convert and align with themselves the various Slavic peoples. Basil I, later known as the New Justinian, would strengthen Byzantine rule in southern Italy and extend his influence over the Adriatic Sea. His successors in the 10th century had to deal with stronger Arab pressure, with the complete loss of Sicily, the sack of Thessalonica, the emperor's second city, but still managed to achieve victories at sea, managing to recover some ground, achieving some major victories by the second half of the 10th century, with the recovery of parts of Syria. Moreover, the powerful Bulgarian Empire would prove the greatest power to challenge the Byzantines, and other peoples, such as the Magyars and the Rus, would begin to sack the Balkans and become threats to them. The empire reached its zenith under Basil II, who achieved a large number of military triumphs against Arabs, Georgians, Khazars, and, most importantly, against the Bulgarian Empire, re-establishing the Danubian frontier. He is also the main contributor to the conversion of the Rus to Christianity. His reign would witness the so-called Macedonian Renaissance, a period of great cultural growth. This golden age wouldn't last long though. Basil II died without a son, and the rest of the 11th century would lead to great turmoil in the Byzantine Empire.